The royal court of Zaloria was filled with golden lights and crystal walls that stretched high above the heads of the gathered nobles. It was a place of pride, power, and ancient tradition. On this day, the hall was crowded with alien lords, generals, and royal family members. They had gathered for a special ceremony, and in the center of the court stood an object that had not been touched for centuries. It was the armor of the ancestors, a relic of power that had belonged to the first rulers of Zaloria. Its dark silver plates shimmered as if holding the light of forgotten stars, and strange markings ran across its surface like rivers of fire. The alien princess, tall and proud, stood before the armor. Her golden eyes shone with arrogance as she looked over the gathered crowd. She raised her voice, strong and mocking. "Behold the armor of my ancestors. Only true heirs of the royal bloodline can hope to awaken it. Many have tried and many have failed. Even the greatest of warriors cannot make it move. It will never bend to outsiders, especially not to weak species like humans." A ripple of laughter moved through the hall. The nobles nodded and smirked, agreeing with every word she said. At the edge of the gathering, a small group of human envoys stood quietly. They had been invited as guests, more as a formality than as true allies. Among them was a young human soldier named Daniel. He was not a noble, not a leader, and not even considered remarkable by his own people. He was just a soldier doing his duty. His dark eyes watched the ceremony with calm interest, but he could feel the stares of the aliens around him, sharp, mocking, and filled with disdain. The princess's gaze fell upon him. Something about the human's calm face annoyed her. She smirked and raised her voice again so the whole court could hear. "Perhaps we should let our guests try their luck. Let the human step forward. Let us see if even he can awaken the armor." Her tone was dripping with sarcasm. The aliens roared with laughter. To them, it was a cruel joke, a way to humiliate the outsider. Daniel stood still for a moment. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room piercing into him. The human envoys whispered to him, urging him to stay back, to avoid the insult. But something inside him stirred. He had been silent long enough. Slowly, he stepped forward. The laughter grew louder. The princess tilted her head and gave him a mocking smile. "Do you really think you can move what even our greatest champions could not? Perhaps your fragile arms will break before the armor even notices you." Daniel didn't answer. He simply kept walking, each step echoing in the great hall. The aliens jeered. Some shouted insults, others placed bets on how quickly he would fail. The princess folded her arms, certain she would enjoy the spectacle. When he reached the armor, Daniel paused. It was larger than he expected, towering over him with its alien design. The silver surface seemed alive, as if waiting. For a moment, doubt touched his mind. What if they were right? What if this was nothing but a fool's errand? But then he remembered every time humans had been called weak, every time they had been underestimated, and every time they had proved their strength not through arrogance but through persistence. He raised his hand and touched the armor. The court fell silent. First, nothing happened. The nobles smirked. The princess's lips curved into a cruel smile, and whispers of pathetic spread through the room. But then, a faint glow pulsed under Daniel's hand. The markings on the armor shimmered, one by one, lighting up like stars awakening after a long night. The glow spread across the chest plate, down the arms and around the legs. The ancient armor shivered, as though coming alive. Gasps filled the hall. The laughter stopped. The nobles leaned forward, their eyes wide with disbelief. Daniel felt a strange energy surge through him. His heart raced, his breath caught, and his body felt heavier yet stronger at the same time. The armor was responding to him. It was calling to him. The princess stepped forward, her face pale with shock. "No, this cannot be. This is impossible." The armor slowly opened, its chest plate splitting apart as if inviting Daniel inside. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, and the armor closed around him. A blinding flash filled the hall, and when it cleared, Daniel stood transformed. The ancient relic had accepted him. The silence in the court was deafening. The nobles could not believe what they had just witnessed. For centuries, the armor had rejected everyone. For centuries, it had remained nothing more than a symbol of lost glory. And yet, before their very eyes, a human had been chosen. The princess's mocking smile had vanished. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, and a trace of fear crept into her heart. She had wanted to humiliate him. Instead, she had unleashed something that could change everything. And Daniel, standing tall in the glowing armor of the ancestors, felt the weight of destiny press down on his shoulders. He had no idea why the armor chose him, but one thing was certain. Nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The Hall of Zaloria remained frozen in silence as the light from the armor began to fade, leaving Daniel standing at its center, completely enclosed by the alien relic. What had been mocked as a foolish act only moments ago had now turned into a scene that no one present could have imagined. The human, once seen as a fragile outsider, was now wearing the sacred armor of the ancestors, something no alien prince, general, or warrior had been able to achieve for centuries. His very presence inside the glowing suit of power sent a chill through the court, as though history itself had shifted in that instant. Daniel stood still for a long moment, his breaths heavy and uncertain, while the weight of the armor pressed against his body. Yet instead of crushing him, instead of rejecting him as it had done to others, the armor seemed alive, adjusting itself to his form, shaping around him as if it had been built for him all along. The faint hum of energy filled his ears, like a whisper from across time, and he could feel strange symbols glowing faintly across his arms and chest. They were symbols he could not read, but somehow he understood their meaning in his bones. They spoke of strength, destiny, and a bond that could not be broken. The aliens in the court could not believe what they were seeing. Murmurs broke the silence, first as whispers, then rising into loud voices of disbelief, anger, and fear. "Impossible!" shouted one of the noble generals, his forearms shaking with rage. "The armor belongs to the blood of Zaloria. This human has no claim." Another voice cried out, "It must be a trick. The armor cannot betray its people. This cannot be real." The air filled with shouts as the nobles struggled to accept the reality before them. And in the midst of the chaos, the princess herself stood pale and trembling, her mocking arrogance replaced with a storm of confusion. She had brought this upon herself, daring the human to step forward, only to watch as the armor embraced him without hesitation. Her heart raced, her pride shattered, and yet deep inside, something darker began to stir. Daniel could feel their anger, but the armor was not finished with him. The glowing lines grew brighter, and suddenly his vision blurred. The grand hall disappeared around him, replaced by flashes of strange images. He saw battlefields under alien skies, great ships burning in the void of space, and warriors locked in combat with enemies he could not recognize. He saw the first rulers of Zaloria, tall and strong, forging their empire with fire and steel. And finally, he saw a figure, an unknown warrior, faceless and yet familiar, standing in the same armor he now wore, raising a blade against an endless storm. The vision filled him with both awe and fear, for he knew these were not dreams. They were memories, pieces of the armor's long history, and now those memories were becoming his own. When his sight returned, the nobles were staring at him, their faces a mixture of fury and disbelief. The guards moved quickly. With weapons drawn, they surrounded Daniel, their armor clanking loudly as they advanced. "Remove it," one shouted. "Strip it from him before it bonds fully." But as they moved closer, the relic reacted on its own. A shield of bright energy flared around Daniel, pushing the guards back with a force they could not resist. The crowd gasped in shock as the soldiers were thrown aside like toys. Daniel himself had not moved a muscle. The armor had acted as if to protect him from harm. He raised his hands in confusion, staring at the glowing shield that surrounded him. I didn't do anything," he whispered to himself, but his voice was drowned out by the rising chaos around him. The alien nobles were in panic, and their fear quickly turned to anger. Some accused Daniel of being a thief, others declared him a curse, and some even demanded his death. Yet there were also voices among them that spoke of prophecy. Old stories were whispered in secret, tales of a warrior who would come from beyond the stars, not of royal blood but chosen by destiny, to either save or destroy their empire. Many had dismissed those stories as myths, but now, seeing the armor awaken for a human, their doubts began to shake. The princess, her golden eyes wide with uncertainty, took a step forward. Her voice trembled as she spoke, not to Daniel, but to herself. Why him? Why would it choose him? She had grown up hearing the same legends, yet she had never believed them. To her, the armor was only a symbol of her family's greatness, a relic to remind everyone of her ancestors' strength. Now it had betrayed her pride and humiliated her in front of the entire court. She could not understand it, and the not knowing burned her more than the shame. Daniel, still surrounded by the glowing shield, looked out at the hostile crowd. His heart was pounding, but not with fear. For the first time, he felt something inside him awaken, something he had never known before. The armor was heavy, yet it gave him strength. It was foreign, yet it felt like home. He didn't know what destiny the relic had placed upon him, but one truth was clear. The galaxy would never see him as just a soldier again. The tension in the hall reached its breaking point. The council leaders, voices raised and angry, called for a trial. If the armor had truly chosen him, then he must prove his worth in the old ways. A test of survival, a test of battle, a trial meant to judge the strength of a true heir. The princess, still shaken, agreed with a cold smile. In her heart, she believed that no human could survive the trial. The armor might have accepted him, but the trial would break him, and when it did, she would reclaim her honor. As the guards pulled back and the council prepared the announcement, Daniel stood silently in the center of the hall, his body still humming with the relic's power. He had not asked for this, but now it was his. The armor had awakened, and with it, so had a destiny far greater than he had ever imagined. The nobles could laugh, they could rage, they could demand his death, but none of them could change what had just happened. The impossible had become real, and the human was no longer an outsider. He was the master of their most sacred weapon. The council chamber of Zaloria did not calm after the decision of the trial was spoken. If anything, the air grew heavier, filled with tension that pressed on every soul present. The alien nobles whispered among themselves, their voices sharp and suspicious, while Daniel remained standing at the center of the grand hall, the relic armor still glowing faintly against his body. Every eye was locked on him, some filled with anger, others with fear, and a few with the spark of dangerous curiosity. For Daniel, it felt like the world had turned upside down in a matter of moments. A short while ago, he had been nothing more than a guest soldier, a silent outsider invited as part of a human envoy. Now he stood as the bearer of a weapon no alien in this empire could control. He did not fully understand what had happened, but he could not escape the sense that destiny had dragged him into a game much larger than himself. The princess, who had once smirked and mocked him, stood rigid near the throne, her golden eyes fixed on him with a strange mix of emotions. Shame burned in her chest for being the one who called him forward, yet beneath that shame was a restless thought she dared not speak aloud. If the armor had chosen him, then it might mean the legends were true, and if the legends were true, then the galaxy itself could be shifting toward a new path. But pride would not let her admit such a fear. Her voice rang out across the hall, cold and sharp. If the armor accepts him, then let the trial prove him. No outsider will be recognized without facing the test of worth. The council agreed with her, and though some nobles shouted for his execution, the law of the empire demanded the trial for anyone claimed by the relic. It was both a chance and a trap, for the trials were designed to break even the strongest warriors. Daniel said nothing, though inside his heart raced. He could see the anger around him, the disbelief, the jealousy, the fear. These aliens wanted him to fail, and if he did, they would strip the armor away and likely his life with it. Yet when he glanced down at the glowing lines running across his chest and arms, he felt something stir inside. It was not just strength. It was a connection, as though the armor itself whispered that he was not alone. Every breath he took seemed to make it pulse with more energy, and though he did not know how to control it, He felt its presence like a second heartbeat. The nobles ordered him escorted to the sacred preparation chambers, where all who faced the trial were taken before being cast into the arena. The guards hesitated to touch him, afraid of the relic's energy, so they kept their distance, leading him with wary steps. As Daniel walked, he noticed how the halls of the palace seemed to grow colder, the crystal walls darkening with the approach of night. His mind was heavy with questions. Why him? Why would an alien relic, older than his entire species, awaken for a human? He thought of the vision he had seen, the warrior in the armor raising his blade against endless storms, and wondered if it was meant as a warning or a promise. When the guards finally left him alone in the chamber, he sat down on a stone bench, staring at his armored hands. The plates of silver metal hummed softly, glowing faintly with living light. He closed his eyes, trying to calm his racing heart. That was when the whispers came. Not voices exactly, but impressions, thoughts not his own, flowing into his mind from the relic. They showed him movements of battle, ways to raise his arm and block, ways to strike with precision. They showed him the history of warriors who had once worn this armor, their triumphs and their falls. It was overwhelming, like memories being poured into his head all at once. But within the storm of images he felt guidance, as if the armor itself was teaching him how to survive. The princess, meanwhile, watched from a hidden balcony, her eyes narrowing as she observed him. She had followed in silence, curious in spite of herself. When she saw him sitting in meditation, she felt a pang of unease. Her people had worn the armor and been rejected, tossed aside as unworthy. Yet this human, in a matter of moments, seemed to already be bonding with it. She clenched her fists, anger burning through her veins. To her, this was more than humiliation. It was a challenge to her family's very legacy. She told herself she wanted him to fail the trial, to fall in front of everyone so she could laugh again. Yet somewhere deep inside, another voice whispered that if he did not fail, then she would need to face the truth her pride could not accept. When dawn broke over the alien city, the trial began. Daniel was led through massive gates that opened into the sacred arena, a place older than the empire itself. The arena was carved into the heart of a canyon, its walls covered in glowing runes that marked countless victories and countless deaths. Thousands of aliens had gathered to watch, their voices thundering in the air, some shouting curses at him, others chanting in excitement for blood. The council sat above them in high thrones, with the princess among them, her eyes never leaving him. As Daniel stepped into the arena, the armor tightened, as if sensing the battle ahead. He looked around and saw the first challenge waiting. The ground rumbled, and great iron gates opened, releasing a beast unlike anything he had seen before. A creature with 6 legs, jaws filled with jagged teeth, and eyes that burned like fire. The crowd roared with approval. Many believed this would be the end of the foolish human. Daniel felt fear strike his chest, but then the armor's whispers returned, guiding him, steadying his steps, showing him where to move. His hands clenched into fists, and a faint shimmer of energy formed around them. The beast roared and charged, and the human met it head-on, not with the strength of his body alone but with the hidden power of the relic that now pulsed through his veins. In that moment, the crowd saw something they had never expected. A human standing tall against the nightmare of their trials. A human who did not run, did not beg, but faced the challenge as though he had been born for it. The tension was unbearable, the disbelief growing with every heartbeat, and the princess, watching from above, felt the ground beneath her pride begin to tremble. The arena floor trembled as the 6-legged beast thundered forward, its jaws opening wide enough to swallow a man whole. Dust and sand rose around it with each step, and the roar it released shook the very walls of the canyon. Thousands of alien voices filled the air with cheers and cries, most expecting the human to be torn apart within seconds. Daniel stood frozen for the briefest of moments, his instincts screaming at him to run. But the armor pulsed again, its glow spreading like veins of light across his chest and arms, steadying his breath and sharpening his focus. It whispered movement into his mind, showing him not what to fear but where to strike. When the beast lunged, Daniel dove aside, the armor moving with such precision that his body felt faster than it ever had before. The creature's jaws snapped shut inches from his head, shattering stone where he had stood. Gasps rose from the crowd, and for the first time, some began to realize this fight might not be as simple as they had believed. The beast spun with rage, its claws tearing across the sand as it struck again and again. Daniel ducked, rolled, and blocked blows that should have crushed bone, each time guided by the strange sense flowing from the relic. At one point, the beast's claw came down like a hammer, but the armor's shield flared to life, sending sparks into the air as the impact threw Daniel backward. He hit the ground hard but rose quickly, his chest heaving as the whispers of the relic urged him to rise again. When the beast charged once more, Daniel did not retreat. Instead, he rushed forward, his fist glowing with raw energy. With all his strength, he slammed it against the creature's jaw. The crowd gasped as the massive beast stumbled, stunned by a single human strike. The arena erupted in noise, shouts of disbelief, cries of anger, and even a few cheers of awe. The impossible was happening before their eyes. The trial did not end there. The council had designed it to be more than a single fight. The beast, though wounded, retreated back into its gate, leaving Daniel barely standing in the center of the arena. His breath was heavy, his muscles ached, and sweat rolled down his face beneath the armor. But he was not broken. He looked up at the towering thrones of the council and saw the princess staring down at him, her lips pressed tight, her pride warring with the fear she tried to hide. For a brief second, their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, she realized that the trial was no longer about honor or spectacle. It was about survival, destiny, and the shifting of power. She clenched her fists, hoping the next challenge would end this human's rise once and for all. The arena gates opened again. This time, instead of a beast, the sand gave way to blades rising from the ground, traps hidden for centuries but still sharp and deadly. The trial was known for testing mind as well as body, and Daniel now faced a gauntlet of shifting platforms, spinning blades, and collapsing walls. He moved cautiously, listening to the armor's guidance. Each time he hesitated, the whispers grew louder, urging him to step forward, to trust. He leapt across gaps that should have been too wide, ducked under blades that nearly sliced his head, and climbed walls that crumbled beneath his hands. The crowd grew restless. Some shouted that he was cheating, others claimed the armor was cursed, and a few, just a few, began to murmur with awe at his determination. For Daniel, every step was terror, every breath a prayer, but deep inside, a strange fire was building. He was not just surviving, he was learning. The armor was no longer just protecting him. It was unlocking what had always been inside him, strength and courage buried under doubt. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. By the time Daniel reached the far side of the arena, he was bloodied, bruised, and exhausted. His body screamed for rest, but the gates opened once more. From the shadows emerged armored warriors, alien champions who had trained for decades, each armed with weapons crafted from the strongest alloys of their world. They surrounded him, their faces grim, for even they knew the trial demanded no mercy. Daniel raised his hands, the armor glowing brighter, and when the first warrior struck, Daniel moved with speed and precision he had never imagined possible. He blocked, countered, and struck back, not as a soldier who had trained in human drills, but as though he had fought alongside the ancient warriors of Zaloria themselves. Every move felt natural, every strike perfect, and the more he fought, the stronger the armor pulsed. When one champion fell, the crowd roared in shock. When a second dropped to his knees, disbelief filled the air. By the time the last warrior collapsed into the sand, silence had spread across the arena. The human stood surrounded by fallen champions, his chest heaving, the relic burning like fire across his body. Above, the council was shaken. Some shouted for the trial to continue, desperate for his failure, while others whispered that perhaps he was the one foretold in the prophecy. The princess sat motionless, her golden eyes locked on the human below. She had wanted him broken, humiliated, destroyed, but the sight before her tore at something inside. She could not deny the truth her own eyes showed her. The armor had not only chosen him, it had revealed his worth. Still, pride refused to let her bow. Her voice rang out over the arena, strong but trembling at the edges. The trial is not yet complete. One final test remains. The ground beneath Daniel began to shake as the final gate opened. A massive shadow stretched across the sand, larger than anything he had yet faced. From the darkness emerged a creature of legend, a beast said to have once fought the ancestors themselves. A titan covered in scales like black stone, its eyes glowing red, its roar echoing across the canyon. The crowd erupted with madness, some cheering, others praying, all certain that no human could possibly survive what was to come. Daniel lifted his head, sweat dripping down his face, his body aching with every step, but when he clenched his fists, the armor blazed brighter than ever before. Whatever this final trial was, he knew he could not turn back. The relic had awakened for him, and now the galaxy itself was watching. The ground of the arena shook like an earthquake as the colossal beast moved forward, its heavy body covered in scales harder than steel, its breath a cloud of fire and smoke. The creature was a titan of the ancient age, summoned as the last test of the trial, and it towered over Daniel like a mountain come to life. Its roar thundered across the canyon, silencing even the loudest voices in the crowd, for all present knew this monster had ended countless warriors in centuries past. No champion had defeated it, no heir had survived its fury, and yet here stood a lone human, his body bruised and weary, his armor glowing with strange alien light. Many in the stands leaned forward, convinced they were about to witness the end of the human's brief miracle, the moment when the legend would crumble into dust. But others, quieter and more thoughtful, watched with eyes that carried a dangerous spark of belief. Daniel stood firm in the sand, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His muscles ached from the battles before, and his strength was nearly drained. But as he gazed up at the titan, the armor pulsed again, sending fresh waves of energy through his body. He could feel it speaking to him, not in words, but in instincts, in flashes of memory. He saw visions of the ancient ancestors, warriors who had once fought creatures like this with the same relic blazing across their bodies. He saw them raise their blades, endure the fire, and strike against impossible odds. These visions were not just history, they were guidance, teaching him step by step how to face the monster before him. Slowly, Daniel clenched his fists, feeling the armor's glow expand across his body until it burned brighter than ever. The whispers of fear in his heart were drowned out by the pounding rhythm of the relic's voice telling him, "Stand, fight, endure." The titan charged, its body shaking the ground as it lunged forward with jaws wide open. Daniel darted aside, the armor enhancing his speed so that he moved faster than his human body should have allowed. The beast's teeth crashed into the sand, sending shockwaves through the arena. But Daniel was already moving, striking with a glowing fist against its side. The impact sent sparks across the titan's scales, but the creature roared in anger rather than pain. Its tail whipped around like a massive spear, striking Daniel and throwing him across the arena. The crowd gasped, some rising to their feet, certain the fight was finished. But Daniel, though dazed and aching, rose again. The armor shielded him from the worst of the blow, and the whispers urged him to press on. The battle raged on, each exchange testing the limits of both man and relic. The titan unleashed flames from its jaws, scorching the ground, but Daniel's armor flared with light, creating barriers that shielded him from the fire. The monster's claws tore deep furrows into the sand, but Daniel leapt and rolled, guided by instincts that were not his own. Each strike he landed glowed brighter than the last, each movement faster and more precise, as though the relic was unlocking more of his hidden potential with every passing moment. The crowd could not look away. What they were witnessing defied everything they believed, that humans were weak, that the relic belonged only to their kind, that destiny itself was written in bloodlines. Now the impossible truth stood in the center of their arena. A human chosen by the armor, fighting with the strength of the ancestors themselves. Finally, the Titan reared back, its massive body lifting high into the air, preparing to crush Daniel beneath its full weight. The crowd held its breath, and even the council members leaned forward in tension. But Daniel did not run. Instead, he raised both hands, and the armor responded with a burst of light so bright it blinded the stands. The relic's power surged into him fully, and he felt his body merge with the energy of ages past. The visions returned, showing him not only how to fight but why the armor had chosen him. It was not his strength alone, nor his heritage, but his unshakable will to rise when others would fall. The relic did not care for bloodlines or crowns. It cared for the spirit of the warrior within. With a roar of defiance, Daniel launched himself upward, higher than he thought possible. Energy wings of light flared from the relic, carrying him toward the Titan's head. He drew back his fist, glowing like a star, and slammed it directly between the beast's burning eyes. The impact shook the arena like a thunderclap. The Titan let out a final roar, staggering backward as cracks spread across its armored skull, light burning through from within. Then, with a deafening crash, the beast collapsed into the sand, defeated for the first time in the Empire's long history. Silence followed, so heavy it seemed the world itself had stopped. Daniel landed on the ground, his armor still glowing faintly but his body trembling with exhaustion. He could barely stand, yet he raised his head and faced the council thrones. The silence broke into chaos, some nobles shouting that he was a danger, others crying that he was the chosen one foretold by prophecy. The people in the crowd roared in awe, their voices rising like a storm, and for the first time, humans were spoken of not as weaklings but as something far greater. The council struggled to contain the uproar, but no voice carried more weight than the princess. She rose slowly from her throne, her golden eyes fixed on Daniel. She had wanted him to fail, to fall and free her pride from shame, but she could no longer deny the truth. He had faced the trial, endured every challenge, and triumphed where all her people had fallen. Her voice carried across the arena, trembling yet firm. The relic has spoken. The trial has been completed. The armor has chosen its master. The crowd erupted again, this time not only with disbelief but with awe and a dangerous hint of acceptance. Daniel, the human outsider, was no longer just a soldier. He was the bearer of their ancestors' power, the one destined to change the balance of the galaxy. The princess lowered her head, bowing slightly in acknowledgement, though her pride burned within her. For the first time in her life, she found herself humbled before someone she had once mocked. Daniel stood tall despite his exhaustion, the armor still pulsing like a heartbeat around him. He knew nothing would ever be the same. The relic had bound itself to him, revealing a destiny he had never sought but could not refuse. Whether the aliens saw him as a savior or a threat, whether they embraced him or plotted against him, did not matter. The path had begun, and he would walk it as the master of the armor, carrying both the burden and the power of the ancestors. The sun set over the alien city, its light washing over the arena as the human in ancient armor stood victorious. The nobles whispered, the people shouted, and the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. For everyone knew this was not the end but only the beginning. A new legend had been born, one that would echo across stars and generations. The alien princess, still staring down at him, whispered words too quiet for anyone else to hear. Perhaps the prophecy was right. Perhaps humanity was never weak. Perhaps you are the one we were meant to follow. And with that, the story of a mocked human transformed into something far greater, something unstoppable, and something destined to shake the Empire to its very core.